This is Main Street with Gary Allen. Now, here's Gary.
Hey, everybody. Gary Allen here, the host of Main Street. Welcome to the program. We have a fabulous show for you today. Mr. Randy West will be joining us in just a couple of minutes, and Randy has quite a resume and quite a story to tell. He's written a number of books, one about Johnny Olson, the great announcer who was on The Price is Right. You remember him. And, of course, he's recently written a book about TV's inside and out, pulling the curtain behind to tell some of the stories about the screw-ups, the flub-ups, and you name it, in show business, and some of the secrets behind the scenes of people you know, the stars and the shows that you liked, and letting out a little bit of the secrets. But I just want to thank all of you so much for joining us here on Main Street and making this show what it is. I just want to remind everybody, on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m., you can catch me on DBTV, and on Thursdays, you can catch me on Fox Valley TV. And, of course, I'm streaming all worldwide on both networks, so we're very, very proud to be part of that. I also want to thank my executive producer, Mr. Tommy Sett, for taking care of all the bells and whistles and everything. But first, let me introduce my guest to you tonight. He is an author. He is he's a speaker, he really is. He's also a broadcast historian. He's a TV and radio announcer, a voiceover actor, a casino game show personality. You can catch him on TV, randywest.com. You can also catch him on Facebook if you're so inclined. Some of the many television shows that he has worked on as an announcer or a personality, which range in 30 or 40 or 50 of them. Here's just a few: The Price is Right, The Newlywed Game, Big Brother, let's see, Card Sharks, Weakest Link. He's worked for such networks as the Game Show Network. He's worked for CBS. He's worked for NBC, ABC, Goodson and Todman Productions, as well as Fremantle, where he's currently doing stage shows of some of the game show favorites that you love and that you grew up with. But he also worked for a gentleman that I worked for a while at Game Show America, Mr. Matt King. So without further ado, would you please welcome, and I can't say this enough, a gentleman who I met some years ago, and we became friends, and we are friends ever since. So would you please welcome one of the dear, dear gentlemen of this business, Mr. Randy West.
Gary, a pleasure to be with you, my friend. Friend indeed, long time, and I appreciate that friendship. Yep.
Oh, listen, I'll tell you what, it's an honor to have you on the program, and I know how busy your schedule is, and I thank you so, so very much. Before we get into your career and Johnny Olson and the book Inside Out, I was very troubled the other day when I saw that CBS is canceling their news department, their news radio department, and I wanted to ask what your thoughts were on that.
My thoughts are Bill Paley's rolling over in his grave. It's a 100-year-old network with the finest reputation. I know folks who work there, and it really is a very dedicated team that's looking to bring well-balanced news. Now, they have 700 affiliates, and I don't understand how that doesn't make money, having that commercial time and 700 affiliates. I hear spots all the time, so it's not like it's unsold. I think it has great deal to do with wanting to spin the news in a new direction, which CBS Television is doing, and that's the Paramount, Ellison, and now going to be Warner Brothers soon, because they're picking up all these channels. So CNN is going to take a new direction as well. So I never thought we'd live to see independent news on the nature that CBS has been doing for 100 years become passé and be gone forever.
CBS television, CBS radio, CBS anything when I was growing up, and I'm considerably older than you, was the gold standard.
Yes. In fact, it's not just the on-air. It's everything about, if you compare CBS to NBC, and this is not a slam for those who work at NBC, but when I worked at Burbank here, the NBC studios, and then went to Television City in Hollywood, the difference, you could smell it in the air. If there's a scuff mark on the wall in a hallway at CBS, it seems like it's painted over in minutes. I mean, it's not like there's somebody running around with a paintbrush, but you could see the same nonsense and craziness on the walls at NBC where somebody ran a cart into the wall. It's just everything about it. CBS had a retirees group, a fraternal organization, and CBS used to pay to buy them lunch once a year.
Yeah. Yes.
And come back to TV studios, Television City, and we'll cater a lunch, and you can use the meeting facilities. And they would show old tapes, Judy Garland shows, and stuff like that. I mean, NBC, to my knowledge, never did anything like that. So, long story short, there's a pride with the network about their employees and their stars, and it goes the other way as well. The employees have a great soft spot in their hearts. And I'll tell you, working at The Price is Right, I never saw a crew as interested in making you comfortable. Very quick story. When you're announcing on a show, if you just are given default settings, when you wear the headphones, you'll hear everything in both ears. And it's so much better to be able to hear the program and yourself as part of the program in one ear and hear the director in the other ear. Now, it's kind of schizophrenic, but it helps you understand what's going on. Otherwise, you hear the director in with the mix of the show, which makes no sense. And I said, hey, I'm not sure we can get this done at some point. Well, they brought out a soldering iron, bing, bang, boom, and it was done. I mean, I never saw anybody that willing to make the experience and the show the best.
My dad always used to have a saying, and my dad was a captain for Eastern Airlines, Randy. And back in the heyday of the airline industries when I grew up, and I had an uncle that worked for one airline and an uncle that worked for another airline, and I just recently had a cousin retire from United. And my dad always used to have a saying, when you see class and you hear it, you feel it, you know it, you want to be part of it. And that's what CBS was. They were a class organization. I remember when I lived in LA and I used to I had a couple of friends of mine that worked on The Young and the Restless, and they used to film right out of CBS TV studio center right there, right across from the Beverly Center, basically.
They're still there. Yeah.
Where I worked part-time as a security officer while I auditioned during the day. But I remember how wonderful I felt. All the actors there were happy to be working on The Young and the Restless. The Bold and the Beautiful was happening there, and how wonderful they all were. Not one of them was snotty. Not one, from the receptionist all the way to the camera people, to the APs and everything. They were so nice always, and they always greeted me. Of course, Eric Braden was the gentleman who I knew, along with some other actors that are no longer with Y&R, but they always greeted you and treated you with respect. When I went to New York and visited a friend of mine who worked for NBC, I never got that.
Mm-hmm. I'll give you a great story. Kate Linder's a friend of mine. She's doing a 43rd year now on Young and Restless. And I said,
she was a flight attendant.
She still is. She still flies. She does periodically.
Really?
Yeah, she does.
Oh, wow.
And the airline loves it. She's a celeb, and she enjoys talking to the fans and getting their feedback about watching Y&R. I asked her, what was it like coming into Television City for the first time through that artist entrance? Did you feel like you arrived to someplace special? Because I did. It was like an echelon, a graduation to another level of professionalism. And she looked me in the eye and put her hand on my shoulder, and she said, Randy, I still feel that way walking in.
Yeah. I always wanted, I asked Eric so many times when I lived there, I said, I know I'm not going to get in a soap opera. With this face, I'm lucky if they'll let me sweep the floor. But I said, can I be an extra? Can I be in back of the scene or something like that? And he would always say, Gary, that's not your, whatever. I say, okay, fine, all right. But it was a wonderful, wonderful time. Speaking of radio, you began your career as a teenager in radio, and back in those days, and what year did you actually get your first job, whatever it was, in radio in New York?
I used to visit Johnny Olson at NBC, watching him tape television game shows as the announcer, and I used to watch him, and he could see that I had passion for that kind of thing. And he said, Randy, you can do this work. And I was like, people from my family don't do that kind of work,
Mm-hmm,
and he said, but you can get into radio. That's the beginning. for all of this kind of entree, into show business, certainly as an announcer. So the minute I could get a job, that was the minute I got a driver's license, because no New York City station is going to hire a kid. But if you can get in a car and drive for a half an hour, you start to find, suburban stations. And my first job on the air was 1972 in Mount Kisco, New York. And it was WRNW, which is the station that later Howard Stern went to. The station moved to Briarcliff Manor. I was at both locations, and he eventually ended up there. So that was my first spot. Next came Middletown, New York. Then came Poughkeepsie, New Haven. You're starting to see larger cities. And eventually I ended up back in L.A.
When you originally wanted to get into radio, I know what it was like. That was not my first love. Broadcasting was not even part of my world. I wanted to be like my dad and my uncles. And when I got out of the Air Force, that was what I wanted to do. But unfortunately, my vision was already starting to diminish. So that was out the window, and I had to find something else. And I found broadcasting to be the next place for me to go. What was your first job in radio?
Well, I cut my teeth at the college radio station. I was majoring in computer science, and then I realized there's a radio station here on campus, and I changed my major and hung out all I could there. Became program director of the college station. So that's really where I learned it. And then I put together a demo tape of me introducing, Paul Simon, Mother and Child Reunion, which was a song out at the time. I remember the original tape I made, and got my best takes and spliced them together, and started running around ever increasing concentric circles around Manhattan, see how far I had to go for somebody to give me a shot. And I got a weekend position at this Mount Kisco radio station, and it turned into full-time afternoons.
Yeah. I was lucky enough that my uncle knew Larry King. And while I was interning out of the University of Miami, they had lunch together, and Larry King was saying, "So how's Gary doing?" And he said, well, he's looking for an internship at a radio station. And he said, have him give me a call. So I called him. He said, now call this guy. I called that guy. Next thing I know, I'm at IOD interning for Larry King, answering phones, and started off that way. And
wonderful Isle of Dreams.
Oh, yeah. The building is still there, but they're not. They moved west. They're about 10, 15 miles west of wherever they were on 79th Street. And but that's how I got started. But I didn't get on the air until I went from talk radio, which Larry King always told me, even my days seeing him in L.A., he always said, you are going to be a talk show host. There's no doubt about it. He said, if you can just get a break, you're going to be a talk show host. So that's what happened.
And here you are.
Yeah, I'm having a pretty good time of it. What took you were you very nervous going from New York to LA? I mean, did you have a job waiting for you in Los Angeles? It's
an amazing story. I was in radio, and Joey Reynolds, who was a big jock at WKBW in Buffalo at the time, was working at 20th Century Fox Records. And he said, hey, you coming out to LA? We'll go to Vegas. We'll meet Wayne Newton. I'm like, Wayne Newton? He says, yeah, he's a 20th Century Fox artist on the record company. So we met Wayne Newton, talked about the radio industry, talked about the record industry. And he said, I haven't had a hit record in a while. How would you go about marketing me to radio stations since you're in radio?
Right.
And we came up with an idea. And the long story, as short as I can make it, is Wayne Newton hired me and moved me from the East Coast to LA on his dime, and I worked for a year at a record company that he started, Aries 2 Records. I was national promotion director because I knew all the radio guys and was able to call and promote the records. And then found my way back into radio after record promotion and radio syndication sales. So I did some stuff on the periphery, but having a microphone in my face is that's my world. That's what I love most.
That's what you said about me when you gave me a what you call it for my website at the time. You said a microphone and Gary Allen. It's a winning combination. I remember that your testimonial that you gave for me. It was really absolutely wonderful. And then while you were out in Los Angeles, I think it was 1988. You were working for Group W, and you were working on their house magazine, their in-house magazine, along with Gary Collins. Is Mr. Collins still with us, or is he passed on by
He's
now?
passed away a number of years now.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
this is Gary Collins, our magazine. On today's show, whatever,
yeah,
whatever, whatever. It
yeah,
was fun. It
yeah,
was my first series, and we did
yeah, yeah,
audience warm up and the announce on that show. Coming up next,
yeah,
Gary
yeah,
talks to so and so. That kind of thing.
yeah, yeah. Tommy, could you get a split screen, please? I can't see Randy all the time. But during that time period, you also worked with Ryan Seacrest. You worked with Wink Martindale. You worked with let's
Bob
see,
Eubanks, Dick
Bob.
Clark,
Yes,
Chuck Woolery.
yes.
I've been through them all, all
What
icons
did
and
you
all fun people.
what did you what did you take away from each one of those that helped move you further in your career?
Well, you're the
You
second
don't have to
banana.
go through all of them, but
Yeah, no, the overall, of course, is knowing your place. And that's to show up with enthusiasm and a smile and passion, like you're thrilled to be there, because nobody wants anything other than that from you. So you leave all the nonsense at the door, So you come in all happy, you seek out the host just to say hi. You don't want to bend their ear too much. But, hey, Dick, how you doing today? We're going to have a fun show. Bing, that's it. If you have the greatest joke in the world that plays off of something he says, you bite your tongue because you're a second banana. Ed McMahon did it for 30 years. When somebody needs you to interject something, here's the most interesting thing. If you work with a host, Bob Barker,
yeah,
Chuck Woolery, Wink Martindale, you see on their face, once you get to know them, you can almost read their minds when they want you to come in. There's a little awkward moment. They
yes,
kind of lost their place
yes,
mentally, and you can just read it if you're, it's like a marriage, you start to second guess and understand the other party. So you're quiet until they need something. And when you jump in and save them, in a sense, well, you got a friend for life. So Martindale and I did 6 or 7 series together. And, some of the other folks were long-lasting relationships as well.
yeah. Well, Wink, I had him on the show many, many years ago, and he also gave me a great compliment, which I was very proud of. When you first worked with Ryan Seacrest, because I had heard of Ryan Seacrest even when I lived in LA when I was out there. And they said this kid sensation, Ryan Seacrest. Did he really come off that polished to you when you were working with him, that he was already beyond his years of his actual age?
He was 19 years old. We did a show called Wild Animal Games. It was his second show at 19. He'd come up in radio. It wasn't like he was on television as a teenager, as a younger teenager.
Yeah.
But he had something magical in his personality and his appearance, the way he worked a camera. And I'm going to show you something. If anyone else is on camera and somebody off to the side calls their name, most of us would say, "Hey, Randy," you go, "What?" And then you're out of frame, okay?
Right.
This kid somehow knew if you called his name from this side of the room, he goes, "Yeah, what is it?" So he moves his body so he remains in frame. This is something that you have to be on television for a long period of time to do instinctively. And he
Right.
had those instincts. It was like he'd lived before. I'm serious. And I'm not just
Yeah.
buttering him up, whatever. He really, and this Wild Animal Game show had a live chimpanzee on the show. People who are real old remember the Today Show with J. Fred Muggs, a chimp on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we had this live chimp, and he would be two-shot with him, the two of them together. And the chimpanzee would like pick up something and start banging it, and Ryan would start banging too, and the two of them be banging together. Just ad-libbing with the chimp, just finding a way to make it entertaining, rather than "Shut up, chimp! I'm talking," or "I'm trying to
Yeah.
read the cards," or "You're interrupting me." I mean, whatever the chimp wanted to do, he was adaptable to, and
You
that's
kind of, you
amazing.
kind of go with the flow. You go with the flow.
Yeah, but
Whatever it is,
but if
you
it's
kind
your
of go with the flow.
if it's early in your career, you're not that natural. Most people, and he was
No.
totally at home on camera.
What would you say is the common thread that all of these gentlemen had, Bob Barker included, and of course the late great, the finest game show host that ever was, Bill Cullum? What would you say that was the common thread amongst all of them?
Well, I was just working on this Bob Barker scandal 2 hour show that just aired recently. I was in
Hmm.
pre-production on that, helping with history and stuff. And they said, "Does Bob Barker have an ego?" And I said, "Yes." And this is the answer to your question, Gary. They all
Hmm.
have egos because the thing that people fear most is speaking in front of strangers. And all these guys not only can do it, they enjoy doing it. So my point is, ego isn't a negative word. Ego can be out of control, but ego is required to stand up in front of strangers, in front of a camera, in front of millions of people, and be comfortable and able to speak extemporaneously. So, yes, Bob Barker had an ego. They all have an ego, a healthy ego.
You
Otherwise,
have to.
they would never be on the air.
Yeah.
Nobody would be on television. You'd be looking at a test pattern all day. Everyone on TV has an ego.
Yeah. But you know something, Randy, with some of the shows that are on TV now, that test pattern sounds pretty good sometimes. I must tell you, I got to tell you one person that I know from what everything I hear, and it may very well be in your book, okay, Inside Out. So we're kind of jumping here a little bit. It was Dickie Dawson. He had an ego that wasn't necessarily, after a while, the healthiest of the world, and neither was McLean Stevenson's ego. I mean, we'll get into that as we move forward. You have also won a lot of awards for game show work, talk shows, the people that you have worked with over the years. And of course, you credit Bob Barker for a lot of your success because of having the opportunity of working with him on The Price is Right. Um, which you did for a number of years, which you also were your mentor and friend Johnny Olson was there. So we might as well start talking about Johnny because he was a major contributor to who I think Randy is, who Randy became. I know you talked about the fact that it was his 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 dedication to the job. I believe you also stated in somewhere about him that he didn't have a huge ego. He came up in the business the hard way when the radio business wasn't what the radio business eventually became, and how he ended up. And talk about that first meeting. Were you nervous when you first met him in New York because you were the guy behind the glass?
I was sitting in the audience, and people sit before a television show. They get you seated, and then there's a
Hmm.
little wasted time, and then it's time for an audience warm up. And some guy comes out and goes, "Oh, how's everyone today?" And Johnny came out as a bundle of energy and enthusiasm. He started handing out dollar bills, sitting on women's lap, kissing old ladies. It was just a party. He turned that room
Yeah.
180. And I just thought that was mesmerizing. He was the most entertaining person I'd ever seen in my life. And then I watched him read copy flawlessly, of course. And he had just a charisma about him. And I sat and used to go back, take the subway. I lived in New York and go to watch him work over and over again. And he realized I was passionate about it. And at first encouraged me, as we said earlier, to get into radio. And I started traveling around the country. He left New York at 72 to work on The Price is Right when it was brand new in LA. I
Hmm.
worked around the country and came to LA through the radio business in 78, early 79. And I went down to Television City. I hadn't seen him in 6 or 7 years. And he recognized, "Randy, how are you?" I was like blown away because I was a
Wow.
kid then. I'm 20 something now. And
Yeah.
hey, Johnny, I've been in radio as you suggested. And he really, tell me about it. And I used to visit him, and we used to go now for lunch. It was a whole different relationship. The man taught me everything there is to know about the business. This is why I say that during the warm up at that point, and then I say this after that for that reason, whatever. He showed me how to mark copy, prize copy, and I'll give you a demonstration of that in a moment. I'll find it in the book here. But he taught me everything, and then passed away in 1985. And I heard nothing from anybody till 1999. 14 years later, I get a phone call. "You, the Randy West who was friends with Johnny Olson?" I'm like, "Yeah." "Well, we're his wife, Penny Olson's nephew.
And
They had no kids. They're putting her in a nursing home. You were friends. There's a lot of material here that he saved from his 58 years in the business. microphones and awards and press clippings. We'd like to give it a good home. So I ended up with everything the man saved. Cufflinks. I mean, everything the
Yeah.
guy saved. And I looked through all his paperwork, and he wanted to write a book. He started an autobiography. And I read it with fascination, the outline, a couple of chapters. And it took me a long time to realize I could finish this book for him. I heard all his stories. I have his outline. And that's what I did. I never thought of myself as a writer, but I wrote 400 pages, sold it instantly to a publisher because it's an interesting guy that everyone sort
Yes.
of knows. And
Yes.
apparently well enough written. So it's sold. Publisher calls me back and he says, write something else. And I'm like, I'm not a writer. He says, yeah, you are. So I wrote this other book here, the TV Inside Out. And now I'm working on a book, Television City. From Television City in Hollywood, the phrase we all know. That's the
Yes.
title of the book that'll be out later this year. And the new owners of Television City have given me the blueprints, the floor plans, the photographs from 73 years. I've walked
Wow.
the facility. I've touched everything. I've taken pictures of everything, all the background. I've interviewed the longtime stars who've worked there over the years and have all this material. It's the most amazing thing I've ever worked on because 73 years of all the history of those stages and the
Yes.
shows and the stars. It's a fantastic work in progress, and it's taken a lot of time, but it's going to be, no one else has the access to what the new owners have given me.
You know, when you were sending out the pictures on Facebook of they were closing it up, tearing down the entrance signs and the interior stuff that you would send out. And I don't know what other people would say to you. I don't really comment back and forth, but it hurt me because, you know, in my 10-year time period that I lived in LA, and my first apartment was up off of La Brea and Franklin, right not too far from the A&M Records, which my roommate was an engineer at. Um, poor. I think we paid a total of $300 for a 2-bedroom apartment back then. You know, would love to find that today. But I hate this theory. Tear down the old and build in the new. I just now I understand there are times because of structural problems and stuff like that that has to happen, you know, but it just drives me crazy. Get rid of the old and bring in the new. The new isn't any better. It just drives me nuts.
You already know the answer to this. Number one of two. Number one, it's a business. All
Yeah.
television and radio has ever been is a business. And number
Yeah.
two is, you know, you got to move forward. Businesses want fresh, you know, material, fresh studios. They want everything new. And, you know, don't forget for a minute when Ellison picks up Warner Brothers, he's probably going to sell Warner Brothers or the Paramount lot, and he'll modernize the other one. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just progress. Here's what I came up with. There is no ledger entry for accountants, no ledger entry for nostalgia. It's just business. I want to show you
Yeah.
something that Johnny Olson taught me, which is
Sure.
why I could never make a mistake when I'm reading copy. That's not a brag. It's just that I learned his secret.
Okay.
which
Get a
is to
close up on
mark-
this one, would you, Tommy?
It's to mark the copy. This is a script from
Yeah.
the Price is Right showcase. Your
Right.
showcase begins, okay? And look at all the marks. And I don't expect you to be able to read the words, but you can certainly see all the markings, the breath marks, the underlining for emphasis, the arrows. All this stuff is how you mark copy for the way you hear it in your head as you read it the first time. Once you
Okay.
make this notation, you can't screw it up because all the interpretation you want to do, even some words in the margins, all the interpretation, the way you want to read it, is all
Yeah.
laid out for you, like music. Mozart
Uh-huh.
wrote music hundreds of years ago. If you take
Right.
the music that he wrote, the paper, you
Right.
can recreate it on the piano because it's all there. And that was the secret to his great success as an announcer. He marked his copy for
Yeah.
58 years. He never said, I'm good enough at this. He marked copy for 58 years, taught me how to do it.
You also wrote about his charm, his versatility, his charisma. That's what kept him going. That's what his secret sauce. That was his secret to success, was his charm, his passion, his versatility. He could give and take. And I think probably has to do with the fact that he began in a business, again, that he had to work hard at, that he probably had no concept of this is where I'm going to end up someday on The Price is Right. There wasn't any Price is Right. He
There was
came
no
up when,
television. There was no
no,
television.
no. And to think he and Roddy and others have turned out to be some of the best announcers that Roddy's outfits, though, sometimes I had to put sunglasses on, but, but, Johnny Olson's voice, you hear it, ladies and gentlemen, there is no mistaking Johnny Olson's voice on The Price is Right, no matter what anything or anyone would say. And I know he would be pleased to know that you finished his book. And I mean, I
Let me
mean,
tell you, Johnny's secret. And you're right about everything you said, but there's one more
yeah,
secret. He was one of
sure,
11 kids, one of 11 children in the same family. And he said, you
yeah,
got to learn to get along with people or you're finished. I had to learn very young. He was the youngest of 11. I had to learn
hmm
very young how to get along with people. And he actually liked people. He told me, don't ever leave the studio until everyone from the audience who wants to talk with you has had
right,
an opportunity to talk to you. And that's lovely. He says, you're their ambassador to show business. Speak with whoever wants to say hello, whatever their story is.
no,
And he would stay and talk for 10 minutes, 15 minutes to anyone. I couldn't do that. I don't,
no,
he loved people. He just loved people and loved talking to them. I don't dislike people, but at the end of a work day, I thank
you're
you,
tired.
goodbye,
Yeah, yeah.
But he
By the
just loved
yeah.
people.
By the way,
That
this
was the
book,
secret sauce.
this book, Johnny Olson, A Voice. Let's see, A Voice in
In
Time.
fact.
Where can they find this book as well as Inside Out, which is what we're going to talk about next?
Well,
Where can they get a hold of it?
any place where you buy books online. So it's Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any place online that sells books. But if you buy it from my website, it'll be less expensive. I don't like the word
Yeah,
cheaper, less
yeah,
expensive. And I can autograph it to you. To my dear friend Gary, always a pleasure speaking with you.
yeah,
All the best, Randy West. So
yeah,
that's the reason to get it at tvrandywest.com. Less expensive, personalized copy.
yeah.
tvrandywest.com.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about your latest book, the book that I'm excited to talk about, and that's Inside Out, peeking behind the curtain of TV and some of the foibles, the mishaps,
Yeah.
the
Well, listen to
screw
this
ups.
subtitle. Here you go. It's TV Inside Out: Flukes, Flakes, Feuds, and Felonies. And that says it all. It's about the flukes,
Yeah.
craziness, the flakes we've all had to work with, the
Mm-hmm.
feuds, and I don't mean family feud. I mean people who work together on the same set for years and years and won't talk to each other the minute the camera's off. And felonies, and there are a few murder plots and blackmail things. Some ugly stuff has gone on behind the scenes. So at this point, I'm willing to tell it all because I think it's so fascinating. And I write a book that I would want to read, the backstage stories that fascinate me. And that's what I
Yeah.
put together. 500 pages. I never thought I could write that.
Man, yeah, it is a big book. Do you think that even though the studio system was done away with, uh, do you think the studio system kind of helped protect actors back in the day, whether you be TV or movie? Because I think that's kind of one of my buddies wanted me to ask you that question. I have a number of friends that when they find out who the guest is, they send me questions to ask the guest. And do you think the studio system not only helped actors cover up their DUIs, their drug addiction, their sexual exploits, and a bunch of other things, as well as it hurt them along the way as well?
Double-edged sword, because once you're under contract with the studios, I'm thinking now of the motion picture studios, that's your salary, and it's very hard to renegotiate. They own you for 7 years, and if you turn down a movie, they tack it on to the end of your 7 years. So you're indentured. I mean, you're like a slave to these people at a low wage unless you really fight, and then you can get some of an increase, but not as much money as if you were on the free market. So it limited your ability to do different projects, it limited your income, and it limited your access to other work. However, as you so cleverly point out, you had guys like Mannix, last name, I forget his first name, was a fixer. Geisler was the lawyer who did all the fixing for a lot of
Yeah.
the studios. And yes, right now you're looking at who's the kid from Backstreet Boys who just got the DUI? They've been showing the footage
Oh,
recently. Yeah.
yeah, I can't remember. But yeah,
So
I mean,
you would never have seen that. They covered up murders. They covered up all manner of indiscretion, sexual,
mhm,
drug
yeah,
use. So yes, it could save your ass, and that was a very positive thing. It kept a steady paycheck coming, but it was also a limitation. The
yeah,
last studio system I'm aware of is the Goodson Todman organization. Now, it was done in such a way that Mark Goodson was not the most creative as far as coming up with an idea. He was a great editor,
mhm.
stager, packager, but the ideas came from guys like Frank Wayne. Some, who's the guy? My goodness gracious, who Family Feud, who
Oh,
Howard
Dickie
Felcher,
Dawson, you mean? Oh,
Howard
Felcher.
Felcher,
Okay,
the
okay,
producers and other names that are escaping me at the moment. These guys were the idea guys, and he kept
mhm,
them on salary at Goodson Todman, whether they had a show on the air or not. They had a lifetime contract for as long as they wanted to be there and stay. You got
yeah,
money every week for forever. Now, once you got a show on the air, you got boosted in salary. So he was running a studio system, if you will, because he liked having the brains on staff. And
yeah.
it was a
It almost sounds like the Love Boat production. And I saw something on that not long ago, a few weeks ago, where they paid the actors that were on the Love Boat top salary. Money was no object when it came to costuming and going here and going there. And they really, literally took the cruise ship industry. Because I remember, because I was working on cruise ships before it really exploded and proliferated itself around the world. Uh, they money was no object with them at all, but there was a lot of scandals that went on, which we can talk about that now if you want to from the Love Boat. We can start there if you want. But the one thing I wanted to bring up to people, real quick before we move to that, is that the studio heads were also can be nasty. They could go after you. One story in particular comes to mind, and I know you know this story, Randy, and that's Fatty Arbuckle.
yeah.
The
Well,
terrible story about Fatty Arbuckle.
he was up in. I'll tell it as quickly as I can. He was up in San Francisco at a party at the St. Francis Hotel, and it
Yeah.
was kind of a wild party. People were drinking, and there was sexual exploits and stuff like that. And some woman said that he raped her with a soda bottle. And
Virginia
this
Rapay.
never happened. Yes, thank you. It never happened. There were no witnesses who saw it, but she went on the stand and said it, and that was enough. He was ultimately, after 3 trials, what's the word? Found
He was
innocent,
he was acquitted of
exonerated.
all he was exonerated of all
Yeah,
charges, and
right.
it was set up by the studio heads and a madam that was kind of her madam at the time. And if you go to the Paramount Cemetery, which is not far, I call it the Paramount Cemetery,
Well,
but
it's
the
Hollywood
cemetery,
forever. Yeah,
Hollywood
Hollywood forever.
Forever. If you go as you enter and you look in the one corner, Virginia Rapay is laid to rest there. Because my
That's
wife
it.
one Sunday wanted to go. I don't know why. I don't need to go to cemeteries. I'm getting to the point,
You'll
but
get there
but
eventually. You'll get there soon enough. Yeah.
she got pregnant. She had a backroom abortion. She got diseased and she died. Fatty had nothing to do with her except maybe he had fun with her at this party, but they wanted to control Fatty, and everything that I've learned since, the studio system could also try to do that, control your life from stem to stern, and that's why
They
many of
ended
them,
they ended his career. He was
yeah,
done.
yeah,
Finished.
he
He
never
tried
recovered.
he worked under another name as a writer, but he never regained what he had, which was a stardom. I mean, he was big in the
He
silent
was
game.
as big back then in silent films as Tom Cruise is today. Could you say that?
Okay. Sure.
I mean,
He
I
was as
mean,
big as they come. Absolutely.
okay. Modern day Inside Out, The Love Boat. I've heard
Love
so
boat.
many stories, so many
Hmm.
stories. Uh, Gavin McLeod. Of course, we all know about the Julie, who was the cruise director. And it's funny because the stories about her with drugs as they were coming forward into the limelight, she was already in drug rehabilitation. She already realized she had substance abuse, and she was getting help with it already, but her career never recovered from it. But you take it from there because you probably know other stories.
I'll give you the great Gavin McLeod story. Now, Gavin, if you watch old TV sitcoms, you may remember him as playing a character named Happy on McHale's Navy. So
Yes.
McHale's Navy was Ernest Borgnine and Tim Conway and a crew, like 7 or 8 or 9 guys, who really had very little to do. I mean, the show was about Ernie Borgnine and Joe Flynn, Captain Binghamton, and Tim
Right.
Conway. And you had these other clowns who occasionally had a line, but there were episodes where he said nothing for the whole episode. And they had him under contract at Universal. He had 3 years doing this show, and it was killing him because he couldn't take other work. It was an exclusive job. And his career is stalled. He shows up there and hangs around on the set. It was depressing as hell. And his fellow workers are coming ahead in the business. So he ended up very depressed. I mean, very depressed, clinically depressed.
Yeah.
And there was one night when he was driving on Mulholland Drive that he told me, he said, I had this uncontrollable desire to turn the wheel and just drive off the cliff. And couldn't understand it, but I almost did it because of the frustration I was living under. And I knew that Peter Falk, Columbo, lived nearby. And he says, instead of turning the wheel and driving off the cliff, he says, which I really almost did, I went to Peter's house and cried. We just sat there and he listened to me tell my story and said, let's do this. Let's go to Universal and let's explain that you're very unhappy and that you need out for your own health. I mean, you have one line in a show every 3rd week. What's the big deal? So he got out from under that contract, turned his life around, but he was suicidal to the max and miserable and drinking. I mean, he shared that with me. You try to medicate your depression. So he was as close as doing himself in as anyone I ever heard of while he was doing McHale's Navy. And of course, you're at the bottom, you're at the top. No other business like show business can do that. Nothing like television can make you rich and famous or tear you down to nothing as quickly as this industry does. So there's a success story. I don't tell it as a negative story, this poor guy. I'm telling it as a success story because turn around, the captain on the Love Boat, I mean, he was, anywhere you went, everyone knew his story. Captain Steubing.
Captain Steubing. How many stories would you say there are out there? Because I recently saw Sunset Boulevard, and even though that's about a movie actress, how many stories would you say run close to that in television, where so enamored with their self and the studios and everything that they can't imagine a life outside of that, and they take it beyond that their mind is corrupt with it. They can't envision themselves as doing anything else.
Well, yeah, and when their career goes to pieces because of their age or their reputation or times change and you don't change with them, you're out, and it can be terrible if you built your life around being famous and around being an actor and around this is your identity. The fall from grace when the phone stops ringing. I mean, you keep picking it up to listen for a dial tone. I mean, hello, it's still working. But it just stops ringing, and those folks who wrap their identity around that for 20, 30, 40, 50 years go to pieces. So there's a lot of alcoholism, a lot of depression for folks who just couldn't adapt to the real world. And how many stories are there like that? I know of dozens. Okay. I've got a second edition of this already working as the book after Television City. And it just writes itself once you start networking with people and find the stories and talk to the person if they're still alive, or talk with their friends, get enough people to vet the story that you know it's true. There's no shortage. There's no shortage. And it's wonderful how we celebrate these people when they're stars. It's sad when they're no longer stars and nobody wants to hear from them.
Yeah. Did you, was there a story or stories that you said, nah, I'm drawing a line in the sand. I'm not going to write about that.
Yeah, sure.
In, I mean, there has to be. I mean, when it comes to children or things that are out of control, did you find a lot of people turned you down and wouldn't cooperate with you? Didn't want to
I had
talk
a few
about any
people
of
say,
this?
a few people said, I really don't want to talk about it. And I would turn that into, let's talk about something interesting that you do want to talk about. And if you keep working with them, you'll eventually get a story, maybe not the story. And sometimes they do open up because you're expressing your emoting with them, you're empathizing with them, and they break down the inhibitions.
Yeah.
It's once somebody trusts you, not to put a negative spin on it, and to tell the story with compassion and feeling. This is not a rag. This is not this. None of this book reads like the Hollywood gossip rags or
And the
National
Inquirer
Enquirer.
you're talking. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
this is not what this book is. And once they realize that's not what your agenda is, you get the story eventually. The toughest story for me to write was the downfall and suicide of Ray Combs from Family
Yes.
Feud.
I
And
remember that happening. Yeah.
I wanted to write about it because there's a great deal to learn from his story. Okay, it's not just telling a tale. There's insight into the human condition. And I called Ray Jr., his son, and I
Hmm.
said, "Are you going to write a book about your dad?" Because I worked with Ray. Let me back up just a little bit. I worked with Ray as his announcer on shows, and we ended up being neighbors after the Northridge earthquake. So we were hanging out in the jacuzzi together at Oakwood Apartments, and we had worked together, and I saw this man fall apart before my eyes. So I knew the story. It was sad, but it had a message to it. And I called Ray Jr. and I said, "Are you going to tell your father's story? Because it needs to be told. People don't
Yeah.
understand what there is to learn from it and how it all happened." And he said, "No, I'm not a writer. I don't want to write it." And I said, "Well, tell me what you think about this and that and that and this." And then at the end of our conversation, I said, "Do I have your permission to write the story? I will write it. I will send it to you. You will tell me what is right and wrong about it and what you want in and what you want out." And we co-wrote the last chapter of this book, which is the story of a guy who was incredible. He did audience warm up on the show called Amen that Johnny Carson owned. Johnny visits the set. He's in an office, and the audience is getting warm up by Ray Combs, and they're screaming and howling. And Johnny says, "What the hell is going on?" He hears it through the walls. And he goes and watches from the back of the room 3 minutes. And he says, "This kid's incredible." And he was a young man. He went back to the Tonight Show and said, "Book this guy, Ray Combs, as a stand up. I just saw enough of him to know he's a hit." Ray Combs goes on the Tonight Show. It's on YouTube and charms the audience. It's the most amazing performance. He just comes across so human and so funny and so real. And from that, Goodson Organization saw him on the Tonight Show, and that brought him a lot of fame very quickly because Family Feud was a big CBS show. So it was a very quick rise. The downfall, he didn't know what to do with his money. He had a lot of family people that wanted a piece of his action. He started investing in nightclubs, comedy clubs. He bought a couple too many houses, so bedding. And then when he was dismissed because they wanted to bring Richard Dawson back, it all crashed. And he had family problems and drug problems and drinking problems and money problems. And he just deteriorated in front of our eyes. And he was checked into Glendale Adventist Hospital on suicide watch. And he charmed everybody. They weren't watching him the way they were supposed to. And he ended up hanging himself. And
Really?
that was the demise. And the family won a lawsuit because they didn't care for him properly. And sorry for the phone. It should stop in 1 second.
Okay.
They didn't care for him properly. There was a lawsuit, and they won a settlement.
Wow. Unbelievable.
So that story is the last chapter in this book. And you asked what was hard to write. That was hard to write.
That was hard. It had to be hard to write. The Mafia and Desi Arnaz.
Yeah. Well, this is a great story. Desi Arnaz tied up with the mafia? Absolutely. He went to school with Al Capone's son, by the way. They were both in Miami. He had come from Cuba. Capone's son was down there as well because the mafia families had interests in Cuba. So he was known. But what got him out of favor is when his company, Desilu, produced a show called The Untouchables, which was the story of Al Capone and Chicago and prohibition and illegal booze and people shooting each other up. It's a great gangster story. It was a great television show based on a book. And
Yeah.
when May Capone, Al's widow, said, wait a minute, I don't want that on the air. She called Desi and said, my husband's name has been dragged through the mud way too much. You don't want to do this show. Trust me, you do not want to do this show. And he said, it's a book. It's a best-selling book. I bought the rights. If I didn't do it, someone else is going to do it. Oh, lighten up, May, And he went and put the show on the air. And May called Sam Giancana. Sam Giancana called Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra called Desi Arnaz and says, hey, amigo, why don't we get together in Palm Desert? And Frank went to Desi's home. They drank. They spent an evening socializing. At the end of the evening, Frank said, by the way, this show, The Untouchables, the families are really not happy with. He says, you came to my house to tell me that? We spent the whole evening as friends here drinking and getting along, and you had an ulterior motive. You tell May Capone she could stick it where the sun don't shine, not his exact words. And the show, The Untouchables, was a big hit for ABC and continued. She pushed the button. She put a hit out on Desi Arnaz. But you can't take somebody's life who's a profile in the mafia unless you get the other family's permission. And she was told by the other families, no, called it off. It was within 24 hours of him taking the hit. We know who the hitman was. The names and places are in the book. And it was called off last minute. Why won't you let me go through with this hit? It's my husband's name is on the line. And this is what the mafia said to her. We don't want to be known as the people who rubbed out Ricky Ricardo.
Do you want to know what?
Desi Arnaz, the producer.
Yes.
We don't want to be thought of as the people who killed Ricky Ricardo. And
Do you want to?
That's what saved his life.
Do you want to hear an interesting story?
Always.
I grew up in Hollywood, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I know the Capone family. The southern part of them, a lot of them still live in Chicago, but I know the ones that lived in South Florida because they own a pizza joint called Capone's Flicker Light. Chicago, it's a Chicago sports bar. I grew up with them. As a matter of fact, the one daughter, we were sitting there one night and the bar was closing up and I was the last customer out and the one daughter was yelling and screaming about everything like she usually did. And I just looked at her and I won't say her name here. And I looked at her and I said, you know something, Al didn't die. He came back as you. And her mother just burst out laughing like crazy. Bob Barker. We've got about 4 minutes to go. Bob Barker, Randy West has been with us for the entire hour. I keep forgetting to mention Randy West. Go to TVRandyWest.com. You can buy the book about Johnny Olson. You can get Inside Out and get more information. Randy's going to come back with us at some point, and we're going to talk more about this book than we are able to do now. But Bob Barker, everybody loved Bob Barker. He was a household name. My mother loved him. My father loved him. I don't know anybody that didn't love him, but he wasn't exactly always honorable, was he?
Well, he had a personality that sometimes would turn negative if he felt that you were distracting his attention or, took him for granted. He had a healthy ego. But his wife, Dorothy Jo, kept all that in check. He was really 90% wonderful to work with until she passed away. And then he became executive producer of The Price is Right. And then he started manipulating the family. He started having a relationship with Diane Parkinson. He had one director fired, Mark Breslow, because he didn't like how many close-ups he wasn't getting. So it became very political after his wife died. She would have kept his all in check. And I found him wonderful to work with. He liked me. He knew I knew Johnny Olson, whom he had worked with and loved. So I came in, just on a red carpet, and he was thrilling to work with. He learned my name the first day we worked together, and the first show, he said, now, Randy, what's the next name on your list? Started using my name instantly. He really liked me. I really liked him. I have nothing negative to say about my relationship with him, but the family at The Price is Right, I'll bring it down to 40 more seconds, had been there for many years, decades. Yeah. These folks worked together for 30 years. And you know what? It's like a family with their own little secrets. You borrowed my dress for the prom and you left a
Uh-huh.
stain on it. I won't forget that. That was 12 years ago. Yeah, but when I was dating so and so, you made him uncomfortable when he came to the house, and that cost me the relate. What are you people talking about? This stuff is 20, 25, 30 years old. So
Yes.
a family that goes to work together every day after day after day, there are little ripples in the relationships. And
Uh,
if you have someone like Barker in his later years stirring the pot, then it becomes a very political place. Not for me, but it
yeah.
was for some.
I loved Holly. I really did. I thought she was so beautiful.
And a
I
lovely,
really.
very intelligent woman. She was going to be a marine biologist. Very smart, very bright, very lovely.
She was absolutely wonderful. Randy, you've got to come back at some point. Promise me you will.
Of course.
I mean, really, it has been a pleasure to have Randy West joining us for this hour as we talked about not only his career and Johnny Olson, but we also talked about the book. Please go to tvrandywest.com and purchase the book on Johnny Olson, also the book Inside Out. It is a pleasure. It is absolutely wonderful. And until next time that we meet, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and God bless.